Does. It looks like folks are joining. Welcome to our session here. It's called Market Leaders Shaping the Net Zero Transition. We do have a great group of panelists today from Mars, Google, and we may get our next panelist from PepsiCo. Roberta was having a few technical difficulties, but we've got a couple minutes before the panel begins. I would like you to encourage you to use this time to think about questions you'd like to ask. Even if we don't get through all of the questions today, our panelists have offered to continue the conversation either through hop-in or email. And, you know, in the next 2 minutes while we're waiting, I would love for you to put into the chat your summer vacation plans, because I'm living vicariously through you. So please give me the details.
Okay, you're on.
There's Roberta. Can you hear?
Okay, it sounds like you can't hear.
I cannot hear.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yay, and I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Hi, Roberta. That's great. Down to the wire.
Down to the wire. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. No problem at all. We have time to spare. And I've asked everyone in the audience to tell me where they're going on their summer vacation so I can live vicariously through them. Looks like somebody's going to Nags Head, Outer Banks. I'm here in Durham, North Carolina, so I'm about a couple hours away from there. Would love, love, love to get out there this summer. Oh, we've got somebody who hit up Yellowstone, the Grand Tetons, and Glacier National Park. Woo! It's a good vacation.
I'm headed to Yosemite in a couple of weeks, so there you go.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. Going to do some camping?
No, hiking, but not camping.
All right. Very good. Man, lots of national parks. I had heard everyone's headed for the national parks this summer. It sounds like you all will be seeing each other out there. Wonderful. We've got a great group. All right. Well, it is time to get started. So with that, I do have a couple of housekeeping notes to get through first, but welcome to the breakout session, Market Leaders, Shaping the Net Zero Transition. The housekeeping notes first, this session is being recorded, so panelists, get that spinach out of your teeth right now. Those recordings will be available about 2 weeks after this event, and you'll probably get an email about that. The second is that I encourage you to use the Q&A box on the right hand of your screen to ask questions of our panelists. I know that you all will have lots of great questions. I will do my best during this session to monitor that sidebar and collect your questions during the panel. If we don't get a chance to address them, our panelists have generously offered to carry the conversation offline, so please do take them up on that. And finally, when we finish up here, please take the survey pinned at the top of the chat box. It helps a lot for planning for next year's session. And don't worry, I will remind you as we're finishing up. So with that, let's get started. My name is Katherine Canoy. I'm a director in the energy and climate consulting practice at 3 Degrees. For those of you who may not be familiar with 3 Degrees, we help organizations around the world set and achieve renewable energy and decarbonization goals. And at the risk of getting ahead of myself here, I'm going to assume that all of you are here today because you already know and understand the why of net zero, why the movement came about, why it's critically important to our climate, and why organizations across the globe are taking the pledge to reach net zero emissions. And so today we're going to jump into the how of net zero, how to get started and how to tackle some of the gnarliest challenges in decarbonization. We're lucky to have representatives from 3 companies today to talk about the how. These companies, PepsiCo, Google, and Mars, are in the thick of their journey to zero and can speak to the challenges and successes across all 3 scopes of emissions. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Panelists, I'm going to ask each of you to describe your role, tell us your company's long-term and any interim climate goals, and give us a little taste of the projects you're working on. Roberta, why don't we start with you, and then we'll jump to Winston and then Maud.
Sounds good. Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks for joining us. So my name's Roberta Barbieri. I'm VP of Global Sustainability for PepsiCo, which, if you're not familiar, is one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world. In addition to the name over the door, Pepsi, we also own Frito-Lay, all of your favorite snack products, and many of your favorite beverage products. We, in January, actually announced a doubling down of our goal for climate change mitigation. We announced a goal to achieve a 75% reduction in scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2030 and a 40% reduction in scope 3 emissions by 2030, followed by net zero by 2040. So about 10 years earlier than what's called for in the Paris Climate Accord. My role at PepsiCo is in large part to help the company achieve that goal. And I have a team that works very diligently day after day to embed climate and water stewardship across the company and identify mitigation strategies and help the company implement them.
Wonderful. Thank you. Winston, let's go to you.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. So my name is Winston Chen. I'm the global lead for renewable energy program for Mars globally. So I manage the overall policy, kind of portfolio planning and development, early stage development of projects for all our facility. So in terms of our targets, so we do have I guess, 2 different set of targets. So first of all is our direct target, which is addressing our scope 1 and scope 2 footprints for our operation. So we have a 42% reduction by 2025 target, and ultimately 100% net zero emission by 2040 for our direct operation. Now on the expanded basis, which cover all of our value chain, that number is 27% by 2025 and then 67% by 2050. Now we have been able to achieve quite good result in some of these areas, especially on the electricity. As of today, our global footprint from electricity is covered by renewable electricity up to 54% so far. And we are working on many more country-based type projects. So far, we have about 11 countries globally that is already have achieved 100% renewable electricity coverage. And with that, we actually are not stopping, because as a food company, our process also involves a lot of heat and steam generation, which is part of our scope 1 scope. So a lot of them are based on natural gas consumption. So we are also working on many different pilot projects globally on that. So we can talk a little bit more about that later on. But thank you for having us here today.
Wonderful. I'll turn it over to you, Maud.
Thank you, Katherine. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for hosting me today. So my name is Maud Texier. I'm head of energy development for Google Data Centers, where more particularly I lead our 24/7 carbon-free energy program. So a little bit of history about the program and how that is part of the Google sustainability journey is last September, you might have seen that Google announced what we call the 3rd decade of climate actions. As part of that, one of our largest targets was actually to announce our ambition to be 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030. And that really came from, the last, I would say, 15 to 20 years of sustainability efforts for Google. We've been carbon neutral since 2007, but actually we also realized pretty quickly that we could not stop here and really had to go a little bit further to keep creating this impact on not just our operations, but also how we can help create more systematic change and really accelerate the work on climate actions. And so that's why pretty quickly we narrowed in around what I would call scope 2 and really our energy footprint, similar to how Winston described his activities on renewable energy for his electricity consumption. Google was in a similar position. We are a large energy user globally. And so since 2010, we started procuring renewable energy. 2017 for the first time, and since then we've been holding that. We've been matching 100% of our annual electricity consumption with renewable energy that we procure globally. But then after that milestone, once again, we realized that we had to move the goalpost a little bit more for us to keep creating this impact. Because at the end of the day, for us, it's not just about being neutral or checking the box of an accounting exercise. It's really making sure that our programs are also creating an impact and a leverage for more like systemic change and action. And so that's why 24/7 is becoming this new goalpost for us, where from an energy perspective, we're trying to look at every hour of our consumptions in every place where we are consuming this electricity and finding solutions in having clean energy for each of those hours. And that involves not just new technologies and solutions that we'll procure on the side, but really requires us to actively engage with the stakeholders in each of those countries and grids. And so this is where we can really start creating more coalitions to accelerate those broader changes for us.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those introductions. Now I'm going to ask each of you some targeted questions. So Winston, let's start with you. As you mentioned, similar to a lot of manufacturing companies, Mars finds a significant portion of its footprint in its scope 1, so thermal emissions from combustion of natural gas or other fossil fuels on site. And unlike purchased electricity, the solutions for decarbonization may not be as well established. So Winston, can you tell us more about how Mars is tackling its scope 1 challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, actually, over half of our footprints are coming from thermal related energy use. So mostly steam generation using natural gas as part of our company. I mean, I should have mentioned that we make many different type of products or chocolate, and actually half of our business are coming from the pet care product, like pet food and canned food and Shiba cat food and things like that. So most of those products will require a lot of steam and heat. So although we are pretty successful in electricity, we're just starting our journey on how to kind of convert our energy use relating to natural gas. So with that, I think we need to keep an open mind as far as the technology, as far as the option available, and we find that in many different countries, many different scenario are quite different because of incentive, because of also risk associated with the feedstock in a particular region, as well as most importantly the economics. So sorry about the phone. But in that standpoint, so we've been trying to kind of find a ways to start converting some of our scope 1 emission targets. So we've done many different type of projects. So for example, in India, where there's plenty of feedstock for biomass, when we build our factory in India, we actually kind of bypass the design phase of using a natural gas boiler. We start right off with a biomass boiler so that we are we can achieve our target from day one. Now, not opportunity like that doesn't happen a lot. You have to have a lot of planning, and you have to be at the right place with the right incentive and the availability of feedstock. So you have to look at all your options, and that's what we are doing. We're trying to map out all the options in different countries, based on the incentive, based on the economics, based on whether or not the process makes sense to use certain type of, technology versus another. So with the combination of those options, we are beginning to kind of decarbonize our Scope 1 footprint on a global basis.
Very cool. Well, we'll all stay tuned to that story, because I know that's a big challenge. Maude, I mean, as you mentioned in your intro, okay, Google has made a very ambitious target to align its clean energy procurement with its hourly operations. That is to say, matching electricity demand with clean electricity supply on a 24/7 basis. But renewable resources like wind and solar, they're intermittent, and there are limited renewable options in certain markets. So how are you doing this? How are you advancing towards your target of 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030? We'd love to hear your progress to date and some of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. So I would say this is exactly why we named this target 24/7 carbon-free energy and not just renewable energy, because we recognize that wind and solar are going to have a large role in decarbonizing the grids, but it's not going to be the only solutions that solves for all. It's really about creating, I would say, this toolbox of solutions that can help us solve for the hours where we don't have wind or solar, but also, as you said, for the places where those resources are just naturally less available. And so that's why, as part of our program, we're looking at really expanding this definition of what is, carbon-free operating type of energy systems. And we're exploring actively new technologies, trying to accelerate the development that could solve for those hours and those places. So that means for us really looking at, beyond procuring wind and solar, which we will continue to do, looking at additional and complementary solutions like energy storage. We're starting adding batteries to our portfolio. We're looking at other types of energy storage that can really help us fill all those hours and all those gaps. And similarly, what are the new alternatives in generating clean energy in the first place, where you don't have wind and solar? An example is we started working with a company named Fervo, who is working on enhanced geothermal energy. And the technology could help us dramatically, I would say, improve the access to geothermal energy across many geographies and at a cost of electricity that would be competitive beyond just Google operations. And so this is just an example of how we are trying to add all those technologies together. And I would say on the other side, another thing that, not to be forgotten is also how do we push on the grids to modernize themselves, so that beyond just looking at the technologies, it's also about how the grids are operating and how they are integrating those technologies. The more interconnected the grids are, the easier it's going to be able to actually capture solar energy on one end and deliver it to the users on the other end. The more the market designs of, or the energy markets are going to be designed to include all those technologies, the easier it's going to be to actually add storage to those grids, because it's going to make market sense and not just carbon emission sense. So this is really, I would say, a balance between diversifying the portfolio, accelerating and putting bets, honestly, on those technologies, supporting them, but also really creating the policy and the regulatory framework for those technologies to have a role and really be, I would say, economic by 2030.
Well, sweet. We all thank you for your service on that one. Roberta, PepsiCo has recently done something very interesting in a new area of decarbonization called insets. Can you tell us about the process of engaging your supply chain to make that initiative happen?
I sure can, Catherine. Before I jump into that, can I just quickly talk about a really cool Scope 1 and 2 project that we're doing in California?
Please do.
And I have a couple of cool pictures. I'll try to go fast. I won't bog down the conversation, I promise. So we have one of our large manufacturing sites is in Modesto, California. It's a Frito-Lay facility that makes Cheetos, Doritos, Ruffles, Tostitos, bunch of our snacks. It crosses about 80 acres, so it's a pretty big-sized facility, employs about 700 or 800 people. We are heading very fast toward a zero emissions facility there. It's a big distribution hub for us too. So we're replacing all of our diesel powered fleet equipment with zero emission or near zero emission technologies. We own a lot of our own trucks. So we own tens of thousands of distribution vehicles across North America. We're a little unusual in that for a food and beverage company. So we've already managed to reduce the site's GHG emissions from scopes 1 and 2 by over 50%, partly due to the conversion to 100% renewable electricity there and across all of our US operations. In fact, just a plug for our progress, we reported recently that since our gold baseline year of 2015, we've reduced absolute scope 1 and 2 emissions by 23%. So not bad over a 5-year period. So this Modesto, California project is about $30 million. We're doing it in partnership with the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. And I would love to show you a couple of pictures. Hopefully this will work. So this is our current truck, 100% electric zero emission vehicle that you would see in Modesto and also in some of our other facilities around the country. Later this year, we are proud to announce that we're taking delivery of our very first Tesla electric trucks. So a little bit of a step change in look and feel of our distribution vehicles. Take a look at that bad boy. Who said that sustainability couldn't be sexy? There it is.
That's slick.
Yeah, very slick. And we're going to make it a little bit fun by doing something creative. So those of you in the Modesto area, you may see this truck with a friend aboard. That's Chester Cheetos. So be on the lookout for our Tesla trucks with those cool graphics on it. So thank you for indulging me on that.
That's awesome. When are those trucks hitting the road?
We're taking delivery, Tesla tells us, end of October.
Sweet.
So hopefully by the end of the year, you'll see some of these guys on the road. But if anybody ever tells you that sustainability can't be sexy or fun, refer them to the Tesla trucks and to Chester Cheetos. Anyway, okay, that's enough of a plug for that. Let me go back to the more equally serious stuff of insetting. So for us, even though we're really proud of a 23% reduction in scope 1 and 2 emissions globally since 2015, our pride is tempered by the fact that we recognize that scope 1 and 2 emissions for PepsiCo are less than 10% of our total GHG footprint. Scope 3 emissions far and above, much more. And within those, our scope 3 footprint, our biggest chunk of the carbon pie comes from agriculture. So we're an agriculture company at our heart. Everything we sell pretty much comes from plants. And we have tremendous depth and scope of agricultural capability and tens of thousands of farmers that we work with around the world. So with that in mind, we have started this year to work directly with partners in our North American corn supply chain on carbon insetting. So, for example, Cargill is a supplier of PepsiCo. We buy corn, processed corn from them. They buy it from Illinois corn farmers. What we're working with them to do is to institute regenerative agriculture practices in that kind of supply shed of Illinois corn growing. And those regenerative practices sequester carbon, which can be measured and tracked. That's not an inset. We're doing it directly with Cargill ourselves. So we are running those projects ourselves. What we're also doing is working with third parties who work with farmers on our behalf. So they go out, they find farmers in our general supply shed area, work with them on regen ag practices that generate carbon credits, and then we buy the carbon credits. So that's an inset. You know, the difference just quickly between an inset and an offset is insetting is carbon reduction or removal. This is a emission reduction that you do within the confines of your supply chain. Offsets are carbon credits that you buy from projects that have been done outside of your supply chain. The distinction is important because under the Science-Based Targets Initiative, if you have a verified science-based target for climate like we do, today you cannot count offsets against your short or medium-term science-based target emission reduction target. Insets you can count, offsets you cannot. Whirlwind tour of that topic, Catherine.
It's wonderful, and there is so much complexity to it. So thank you for taking the time to explain that. And it actually it touches on a question in our Q&A panel from Howard Sharfstein about how you regard natural climate solutions, so tree planting and regenerative agriculture as a strategy for carbon offset. So Winston or Maud, do you want to take a stab at that answer too, since Roberta got to answer it as well? If not, I've got plenty of other questions.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I can give a quick answer because this one is more outside, I would say, of my typical scope 2 perimeter. But as part of our carbon neutrality work, every year we do buy carbon credits from what we call high quality carbon impact projects. And so as part of that, we have a variety of solutions that are natural based as well. So we can dig more into that, but it's really more about the carbon neutrality work. And for carbon-free energy, we really focus on more, I would say, elimination and less about offsets. And so that's why we are looking at purchasing clean electricity directly, for instance.
Maybe to add on that, for us, we haven't really started relying heavily on offsetting. I think, there's something that is part of the option that we might exercise at a later point, but we want to explore all the other options that we can actually create something like a project, maybe invest in some kind of, like Roberta mentioned, some kind of partnership with our supply chain to help create some of those inset and carbon credits from within our supply chain. I think that's our primary goal right now. But at some point, I think because of the complexity involving the scope 3 value chain, for example, you can work together with Cargill or your supplier on some of the scope 3 footprint. But when you get to the farm level, it is very difficult for us to kind of engage with, let's say, a farmer, right? So that's where the place that we might kind of consider like a more offset type scenario. So, but that's a totally different topic. So
interesting. Great to hear that, because so many of our clients at 3 Degrees are dealing with that same challenge of addressing the supply chain and all that. So I've got a question that I'd like to pose to all of you. So your perspective, obviously, is coming from the vantage point of a very large corporation, but there are lots of small and mid-sized companies now that are setting climate goals, which is awesome. So what, put on your hats, imagine that you are now working for that small to mid-sized company that has taken on this ambitious goal. What tips and advice do you take from your larger organization and use them in those smaller organizations, and how do you get started on your journey? I'll take volunteers on who wants to start.
I can jump in, Catherine. I'll give it a shot. Let me answer that a couple of different ways. If you're looking for this may be oversimplification, but I think if I look across all of our emission reduction levers in PepsiCo, which one of the most difficult things about addressing the climate crisis is there is no single silver bullet, but there is a lot of silver buckshot. So you have to shoot the buckshot, which means you have to do everything at the same time in parallel to hit the target. So it can be overwhelming. If you're looking for probably one of the easiest and and I would argue least expensive and sometimes even cost beneficial, it's renewable electricity. That's changing a little bit over the last 6 to 8 months when renewable energy credit costs are going up because demand has skyrocketed so much. But we have examples where we're actually saving money on electricity by engaging in virtual or direct power purchase agreements. So, and it's one of the lesser complicated reduction levers because it's pretty direct. So low-hanging fruit would be renewable electricity in my view. Another place to go is your suppliers. So again, it's a little bit difficult if you're a small or medium-sized business. You may not have a lot of leverage with your suppliers, but you can at least start the drumbeat with them of these are your expectations as their customer, that they will convert to renewable electricity, that they will look to set a science-based target for climate. This only works if all of us do it. If the 3 companies on this panel go carbon, free or net zero emissions tomorrow, it's not going to solve the problem. We all have to do it. So renewable electricity is a low-hanging fruit-ish, and then start the drumbeat with the people and the companies that you buy products from.
Yeah, I agree to anything that Roberta mentioned. I think for us, we actually have created a program to help, smaller company within our supply chain to take the first step, right? Creating a target, understanding all these different, carbon accounting, and those are scary things for small suppliers. So for them to take the first step, it's very difficult, and sometimes we are trying to kind of step up and transfer some of our learnings so that they get comfortable behind the idea of doing a long-term power purchase agreement, all the credit and risk and exposure in terms of long-term price risk. All these things are complicated for a small company, and they might not have the resource, but we are trying to help educate them. We actually announced a couple of things during the last 12 months. So one is called Planet Pledge, where we help our supply chain to take the first step to commit to this similar target. And we also created a program with the help of a external consultant called Guidehouse to help provide some of those basic education, carbon accounting, setting your target, options available to decarbonize and things like that as a starting point for a smaller supplier within our supply chain. So that would be a very helpful, resource for those companies.
Yeah, I would echo what Roberta and Winston mentioned. And first of all, I would say if you are responsible for a sustainability program within your company, engage actively with your CFO. I think today we all need to recognize that sustainability is a business opportunity. It's not just a cost center anymore. I can give the example of Google Cloud, which is very close to our data centers, and more for cloud customers are actually putting sustainability before pricing, for instance, when looking at benchmarking solutions. So it really becomes a differentiator for a lot of our customers, and so I expect a lot of companies to actually see value from a revenue perspective by pushing more on sustainability. So that's one first thing that I think would help you gain more traction internally. And then externally, I agree, it's very complicated to sign a PPA. It's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 can be very overwhelming. But there are more and more coalitions. And so I would encourage everybody to look for those coalitions to help you learn and also aggregate your needs with other buyers. We've been very engaged with the Renewable Energy Buyer Alliance as an example to get more and more corporate buyers into PPAs and clean energy procurement. And on the other side, as Roberta mentioned, you have to do 1,000 things to get to zero, but at least start with one. Don't get too overwhelmed, and go to the low-hanging fruits. And we've been working on that for like 2 decades already, and we started with carbon neutral, and then we started with a global renewable energy, buying wind and solar where we could, and know that we're there, we can go to the next step. So I think it's really about iterations and a continuum on your journey, and less about trying to do this this one shot or this one thing that will get you to zero right away. So it's all about iterating and starting somewhere.
Those are great thoughts. Thank you all. That means a lot, I think, to a lot of the small, medium-sized companies that are out there dealing with these challenges. Maybe for the first time, maybe they're in the thick of it with you, but that means a lot. I'm going to pause and look at our Q&A here. We've got a lot of good questions. David Jaber asks, can you say more about any conflicts you have seen between the scope 1, 2, and 3 accounting process and worthy projects? For example, the inability, say, to get credit for a project, so to count a project that you've determined was a good move forward. Tough stuff. I'm not throwing softballs, folks.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is what you're getting at, David, but correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. And it gets back to my insetting, offsetting comments earlier. Offset projects are really important, especially like carbon removal offset projects like preventing deforestation and reforestation. And unfortunately, today, they don't count toward your science-based emission reduction goal. So, I have a real concern, and we've been talking about this, the community with SBTI, that we're being, those of us with science-based targets are disincentivized from doing carbon removal projects, whether they're insets or offsets. We're disincentivized from doing emission reduction offsets. So, that's been a little bit of a painful moment for me, over the past few months, because PepsiCo, we're not doing offsets. Instead, we're funneling that investment into insets, but there are so many great offset projects out there that we would love to invest in. So that's a little bit of a disconnect right now in the community, I think, around accounting and reporting.
Yeah, we're facing the same challenges on Scope 2 and around our 24/7 program, which is, I think we need to realize that the GHG protocol has been made 10 years ago and really helped catalyze a lot of those discussions and programs on sustainability. But fast forward 10 years later, we have a much more complex environment. And we're all trying to move more towards, I would say, impact. And a lot of the Scope 2 and Scope 1 and 3 accounting are not necessarily capturing those metrics and, this continuum of metrics and impact. And I think that's a challenge today for us. For instance, your Scope 2 can be neutralized with a renewable energy credits that comes from anywhere pretty much, in the US or even in the world, and regardless of what is the actual impact of these projects on the grid. And so those are the type of things that, as part of our 24/7 program, we try to create and has to be outside of the Scope 2 protocol today. Other buyers are looking at other also social impact criteria, for instance, that I think are very helpful, but not necessarily captured. So I think we need to realize that, unfortunately, this is a strong accounting basis to make sure we have a referential, but that today it's a much more complex environment. And we need to be able to recognize and evaluate how those different programs are creating different impact at the end of the day.
Maybe to add on that to both of your comments, I think, when you're dealing with like Scope 3, working together with your supplier, for example, we are looking into working with our dairy farm supplier on how we can decarbonize the dairy supply chain. Now, depending on how you participate and what kind of project you create or co-create with your partner, there is a chance that because of the incentive being monetized, there could be a chance that they thought by doing a dairy manure digester project, they are able to decarbonize their product. But in fact, that they cannot because they are selling the attribute to the RINs market or the transportation market. So there's got to be a very careful understanding between you and your partner on what counts and who actually take the final ownership of the attributes, so that they don't expect that they are actually doing something that can decarbonize their product but end up selling that offset in order to justify the project and end up not having any impact to their carbon intensity. So something like that has to be a very, well thought out as far as who owns what and where the accounting, comes in, and hiring some kind of audit and expert to understand the food chain of custody is very critical in this type of project. I think so.
Yeah. Above all else, transparency, right?
Yeah.
And having the conversation and talking about what's in, what's out, and all the rest. We highly encourage transparency here. So, Winston, I'd like to ask you another one. Sorry to put you on the spot again, but so you touched on this, and I understand that you're in the midst of an aggregated renewable energy procurement exercise with members of your supply chain. I think that would be really interesting to the audience. So, can you tell us more about that aggregation? Some of the challenges, of course, but what are the benefits of aggregating your load with some of your supply chain?
Yeah, I wish I can disclose who those company is. We are actually in the process.
Don't tell us too much.
We are in the process of drafting the announcement as we speak. But we are actually having a few different activity in this area. So the first one is going to be in US. We are aggregating with 2 suppliers from our pet care business to create a new project in the United States. So it's going to be a wind project. I can say that. I think from a challenge standpoint, right? So as I mentioned, these 2 suppliers that we are working with, actually it is their first PPA. So we have to kind of help them understand and all different kind of risk exposure, what's required in terms of a long-term PPA. In some cases, we actually help persuade the business case to their senior management team, to their CFO, to their CEO, as a partnership between us and our supplier. This is going to help us both, right? So to overcome the hurdles, that's one thing that we need to overcome as far as taking the first step. Now, I mean, some other challenge, obviously, different supplier might have different appetite for risks. And they might have different credit profile. I mean, the 3 company here have very strong credit profile, but a smaller supplier might not have as strong as credit. So by working together, aggregating the load, the developer will consider that as a total kind of credit calculation to when they go to finance their project, right? So it's not just a small supplier, it's Mars plus 2 other smaller supplier, and Mars being a kind of a key tenant for the agreement. That's going to help the other 2 smaller company to go through the hurdle as far as getting the financing, getting to the scale where we are able to achieve a much bigger project. So, for example, another project that we are working on with another supplier outside the United States is to see whether or not we can actually put together enough volume to go after one of the big offshore, European wind project, which provide a significantly better financial and scale because of the aggregated volume, combining all these companies together. So all this little thing adds up together to help improve the financial economics and the risk profile overall for the project. So
that's cool, Winston. Thank you. We're really excited about where aggregation is going and allowing a lot more players to get involved in the VPP market. So thanks for that. Mode, what comes next for Google once you've tackled 24/7 renewable energy? I mean, you guys are so forward thinking. What do we all need to think about in the next decade or so?
Well, we got through 2030 to get there, so still a few years. But I would say for us, it's less about Google getting there. It's really how do we create, a market signal and a market change by really shifting some of the narrative from what used to be a more general procurement strategies and really focusing the attention on decarbonizing the grids and not just our operations. And that's really what we hope to do through 24/7. So we'll do our own progress. We'll get to 100%. That's really our goal. But how do we bring others as part of this journey for us? And how do we enable our own users and customers as well as part of that? So it's less about signing all the PPAs we have to by 2030. it's really about engaging with our stakeholders to create the tools that Google can use, but also other companies are going to be able to use. So we talked about PPAs. PPAs are very challenging, for instance, for a lot of small companies or just companies to execute and sign on. And so how do we work with other energy suppliers and energy companies to create new ways of procuring clean energy? We started doing that with our partner AES, who are created a first-of-a-kind contract to actually give us clean energy as part of our electricity supply for data center in Virginia. And that's the first time that they are actually bundling all kinds of carbon-free energy technologies within one contract, so that it's not a PPA. You don't have to look at every project you're buying. It's very aggregated and bundled. And so we hope that by driving those type of innovations, not just technology innovations, but business approaches innovations, it's going to make those, those type of targets and programs more accessible for more users. And I would say that's really what's next for us beyond our own operations, is making sure that we make 24/7 accessible.
Awesome. Very good. I think we have time for one more question, so I'm going to pull from the Q&A. And this is a really good one. Andrew White, how are all companies working with service providers on Scope 3 supply chains? So obviously there's a lot of information out there about physical supply chains. But he says it gets murky quickly for professional services firms. And I can speak from experience on that one, as a consulting firm. That most of our footprint is purchased electricity, and we're on the smaller side, so don't have a tremendous amount of influence over that, and but of course are looking at our options, right? So each of you, if you've got a moment or some experience on how you deal with service providers in your supply chain.
That's actually a good one, because usually, as you mentioned, right? I mean, a service provider is mostly electricity, right? I mean, their office, their data,
that's right,
kind of database. So if we hire, a 3 degree to do our renewable procurement,
yep.
Most of their footprint are coming from the I guess the server and office use. So we can, we have a similar kind of approach with our retail space, right? I mean, it's mostly electricity. We sometimes don't know exactly how much they use. We rely on some kind of estimate. Could be a square footage. It could be, if you have a service firm of 100 person in a 10,000 square feet office, that's the estimated usage. Then we use that as a estimate to factor into our total overall footprint calculation. So.
Yeah, I actually take the other angle, because Google is the service provider of a lot of users. And so we end up being in the scope 3 of a lot of global users. So as part of that, what we are trying to do is take this principle of what we call transparency. And so we've been trying to gather and really aggregate more and more data around informing our users on, what is the carbon-free energy content of the cloud, of the region, so that they also feel empowered in being able to make their own decisions and making their own choices. We give them a menu of options around which regions might be more sustainable, for instance, and they can also track our progress around that. So it's really about data transparency and making those data and those information actionable for our own customers to give us the feedback and really send us back the market demand on what they prefer and where they want to invest.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, folks, I hate to say it, but we are already at time for this panel. This has been a great discussion. I'd like to thank our panelists for taking time to share their experience. And thank you to the audience for attending and asking some great questions. Please do remember that our panelists have generously offered to answer any additional questions through email or through the Hop-In platform. So please do reach out if your question wasn't answered today. And before you leave, please do fill out the survey in the chat box. It's tremendously helpful with planning next year's event. So thank you all, and hopefully see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.